Breaking tonight, Florida's new congressional map is already facing its first legal challenge. A pro-voting access nonprofit has filed a lawsuit alleging the map that Governor Ron DeSantis signed into law today violates the state's Constitution's ban on partisan gerrymandering. Meanwhile, just across the way, Alabama state lawmakers convened a special session starting today for Republicans to redraw their congressional map. Governor Kay Ivey requested the session in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision to weaken the Voting Rights Act. Alabama is currently prohibited from changing its map before 2030. You know why? Because its last map violated the Voting Rights Act. Now the state is asking the Supreme Court to revert back to its old gerrymandered map from 2023, a move that would substantially change the district of Black Democratic Congressman Shamari Figures. And joining us now is Democratic Congressman Shamari Figures of Alabama.
You know, Congressman, the court decision that created the district that you currently represent from the Supreme Court, the decision said that the congressional map that Alabama drew likely diluted Black voting power. They diluted the power of Black voters, and that is why that map had to be redrawn. Now, the Supreme Court essentially is saying that doesn't matter. This is not about, no shade to you, your job specifically. I think a lot of people hear these stories and they think, oh, the Congressional Black Caucus, the members don't want to lose their seats. They don't want to give up their own power. I think this is a story about the power of Black voters all across this country, but specifically in the South. And this ruling and these state legislatures and many of these governors are attempting to silence the votes, to dilute the power of Black people to be able to participate in our political process.
Good. Hi, Simone, and good to be here with you guys. Look, I think that's exactly right. And I think, in this case, fortunately, we already had a 3-judge panel that made that determination exactly in the state of Alabama. And these weren't just any 3 judges. These were 2 judges appointed by Donald Trump and 1 judge that was originally appointed to the bench by Ronald Reagan. So these were conservative judges that reviewed the evidence, reviewed the facts, and came to the conclusion that the state of Alabama had likely discriminated against Black voters in how it drew its maps. And the Supreme Court actually upheld that decision. So, this is, unfortunately, a part of the longstanding history of this state and other states in the South that have undergone historical efforts to try to dilute the Black vote and limit the opportunities for fair representation. And we're going to continue to push back and fight against it.
Congressman, I want to ask you about that point about what this means specifically for the American South. But in order to articulate that point, I want you to take a listen to some voters in Montgomery speaking out today about what is occurring in your state. Take a listen.
They want to take us backward, but we're not going peacefully. We are going to continue to press forward. That's the only choice.
When you stand and watch the deterioration of a democracy in this country, it's pathetic.
We're already processed for the primaries. It's just blatant. To me, it's just blatant racism.
Congressman, we are having this conversation coast to coast. We are having this conversation about democracy and the slip slide toward autocracy all across this country. But there is something very particular about what is happening in the American South that I think we can all learn from. When you talk to your constituents, what is the fear that makes it different than what is happening in California or somewhere else?
Oh, I think it's the history, right? I think it's the history of the state of Alabama. As you know, I have the privilege now to represent the city of Montgomery, in addition to other places throughout this, throughout the state. But Montgomery is the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement that gave rise ultimately to the Voting Rights Movement and ultimately led to a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act. And we still have people here that were alive and part of that struggle. We certainly have people who are the legacy of people who were a part of that struggle. So people knowing what this place once looked like, knowing what the limited opportunities for African Americans were to have a voice in government, still having people who were around to remember where trying to vote or trying to register people to vote could literally jeopardize your life and your health and your well-being. That really means a lot to people here and still resonates a lot with people here. And that's why it's a little bit different here in the South.
Congressman, I'm glad you went there, because that's where I want to land right now. Because when you stop and think about the arc of history here, and you stop and think about where you are and the people you represent, that just 50, 60, 40, 30, 20 short years ago, my friend, you could not represent them. You didn't have a political voice. When I read this language that talks about how there's no equivalency between political power and race, I'm dumbstruck, because that is at the heart of what segregation is. It is about race using political power to suppress the aspiration of racial minorities. I give you, sir, as we look at all things coming around that go around, and how you set up the future by laying the path, as Justice Clarence Thomas did in the dissent in the Alabama map case in June of 23, noting basically, this thing does not remedy or deter. This decision does not remedy or deter unconstitutional discrimination and districting in any way, shape, or form. On the contrary, it requires it, hijacking the districting process to pursue a goal that has no legitimate claim under our constitutional system. The proportional allocation of, here we go, wait for it, political power on the basis of race. Such a statute cannot be considered remedial, preventive legislation, and the race-based redistricting it would command cannot be upheld under the Constitution. Justice Kavanaugh would then go on and write that the authority to conduct race-based redistricting cannot extend indefinitely into the future, sir, and here we are. That future is now.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the Louisiana case is that Justice Alito actually countered that and actually said you actually can use race to remedy a Section 2 violation when properly construed. I mean, listen, this is part of the reason we got to where we are in the state of Alabama in terms of having this court order was the fact that the state of Alabama refused to comply with the federal court orders on multiple occasions in ways that the federal court had never seen before in this type of case. And so to remedy that, the court ultimately threatened to put the state of Alabama back into preclearance, and therefore the state agreed to the order that they would not change the districts here until 2030. Another interesting point to note about the Louisiana case and how it impacts here in Alabama is on the last page of that decision, in the last full paragraph of that decision, to your point about race and politics and intermingling of the two, Justice Alito specifically says we are not overruling the Alabama case because in the Alabama case, the state of Alabama did not even attempt to defend its map as a partisan gerrymander. So they didn't even make the argument. And so now in these efforts that we're seeing now, it appears that the state of Alabama is trying to put that toothpaste back in the tube and now go back to the courts and say, oh, no, it was political gerrymandering after not making that argument for years.
Yeah, Congressman, the problem is they've smeared that toothpaste all over the Constitution.
Republicans have the supermajority in the state legislature in Alabama. I guess what can you all do?
Well, look, we recognize the realities of the dynamics in the state legislature. My mother is a state senator. So we fully recognize the realities that what they want to pass in this session is going to happen. But we certainly cannot sit silently or quietly by and just allow them to ram something through. And what they're doing now is actually not an attempt to actually, per se, redraw the districts. They are essentially setting the stage to allow them to expedite another primary under previous iterations of a map in the event that the courts allow them to do so. So it's a little bit different here than what we're seeing in some of the other states. They're really just kind of laying the groundwork here to be able to move very fast in the event that the courts do overturn the maps. But nevertheless, this is all part of the same effort to get to a point to remove the legitimate opportunity, not the guarantee, not the promise, but the legitimate opportunity for African Americans, especially here in the Deep South, to have a legitimate opportunity to be able to elect representatives of their choice.